Hi, this is Big Top Books, and welcome to my first ever YouTube video. If you're seeing this, that's kind of crazy, but I'm so happy that you are here, and I hope you choose to stay as I review my favorite books from January. As you can see from my stack here, we have a lot of fantasy and sci-fi in here, but towards the bottom, it's kind of in the lit view, there is a Fredrik Backman book, some lit fic, because I was in a real big fantasy sci-fi kick during January, ending with Wind and Truth. I just wanted more, but now I'm kind of transitioning into February with more literary fiction. As you can see, our hidden stack back here we have Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen is my current read, which I'm really enjoying. I'm about 120 pages in, plan on reading more of this today. And this one has a touch of magical realism to it, which definitely helps, as you can, with my interest in fantasy and sci-fi. So let's get into my January books. All right, one more thing before we get started with the reviews. If you can see here, we have the Hunger Games books, but not the first one. I have the first one here. Also, look just how beautiful this is. These are the deluxe editions, sold at Barnes & Noble right now. Oh my God. They take my breath away every time. And it also has this quote. It's backwards. Winning means fame and fortune. Losing means certain death. I love the Hunger Games books, and I wanted to reread them before Sunrise on the Reaping comes out on March 18th, I believe is the date. So I reread them, but I already reread this one about a month and a half ago. Sorry, a year and a half ago. January felt like a year though, so I'll forgive myself for that one. But I did read the rest of the series, including Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I'm very, very excited to talk about. All right, so the first book I have today is the big one on top for some reason. Wind and Truth by Sanderson. You can see I got a signed edition. How cool is that? Got Sando's signature right there. Makes me so happy. Wind and Truth. This book, all right, this is a hard one to talk about for many reasons. I think the main reason, it's the fifth book, and the final book of an arc of the Stormlight Archives, and it's halfway through. There's going to be 5 more. I think in 8 years the next one comes out. I loved this book. A lot of people, there's been a lot of criticism that it's not as good as his others, which I completely understand, and I hear all of the criticisms coming from there, but I just enjoyed it so much. This book, let me see the page count. I believe it's 1,329 pages. It flew. But every time I picked it up, I was just flying through these pages. He's just a master at layering and just keeping you on your toes. You're wanting to know more. And the magic is just so cool. And what I really love about this book, I don't want to give any spoilers for it. What I really love is the way it transitions in tone. Like, you've always known this world for what it is, and like when I was reading, I know when I reread them, I'm just gonna feel so nostalgic for the first times I read it. But this one kind of changes it up a little bit, and I think it's really going to help this series propel forward into a kind of a different feeling. And it was so cool, and I love the characters in these books, and I think he did an amazing job of closing their arcs, and I was crying. I cried like a baby in some of the parts in this book. I really loved who we got in the backstory here. I thought it hit really hard because most of the series you have no idea who this character is, and then suddenly you get everything. And that's what I love about Sanderson's writing, and what I keep coming back to. I read Stormlight first, so Way of Kings, the first book. I read those first, and then I read Mistborn, because I'm like, I just need to know more about this world, about the Cosmere. But what keeps me coming back is, even if I don't necessarily feel connected to a character in an earlier book, I know I'm going to get it later. He's going to give it to us, and he's going to make you understand exactly how that character feels. But this one, man, and I loved, there was so much more representation of identities. I hope he continues on that track, because it gave it special feel to this book compared to the other ones, where that was a big criticism of mine, was, put it frankly, a bunch of just straight characters. There was no diversity in sexuality or gender, and I like to see that. I'm very happy to see more of that. If you love fantasy, you have to read the Stormlight Archives. It's a masterclass. It's the best epic fantasy that I've read. I have not read. I read a wide variety of genres, but I don't dive deep into any one genre. But this is the best I've read as far as epic fantasy goes. All right, for our next book, this one's a sci-fi. It's a lit RPG. That one is Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. So lit RPG it basically is like you're reading a video game, essentially, and I felt that 100%. There's probably a deeper meaning into lit RPG and the exact parameters of it, but that's what I was told this is, and that's what it felt like. And I really enjoyed this book for its humor, but also it goes deeper than just the humor hides how horrific some of the things going on in this are, and the whole premise of the book. So in this book, our main character, Carl, his name's in the title. I'm so bad with character names. Carl is thrust out inside into the world after his ex-girlfriend's cat jumps out the window. Princess Kitty is the cat. And then as he's chasing the cat, trying to find it, the world suddenly collapses, and everyone that's indoors is dead. And then there are basically, I got little tunnels that go underneath the ground, a voice that tells them to participate in these games, where there's 18 layers of a dungeon to go through, and you can participate in that or you cannot. If you don't participate, you're gonna die, and then if you go in the dungeons, you're probably gonna die too. So that's the premise of the book. It's, like I said, it's very funny, and I love these characters, Carl and Princess Kitty, their banter back and forth, and it's a little weird to get your head around at first, because it's this talking cat, and there's a bunch of strange things in the world. It's very fantasy in the world building. It's kind of like, I used to play this game, Baldur's Gate, and there's a new one, Baldur's Gate 3. I haven't played the new one. I don't have a new system or anything, but I played it on computer, the original one, and it just felt like I was in that world again. The language and it's so cool. The rules of the world really runs like a video game. So if you love video games, I 100% recommend this book. And yeah, it's very much boy humor, if you know what I mean. I think a teenage boy really laugh hard at these. He follows through with it, and he really hones in on it well. I don't know why I snapped. But yeah, I really recommend Dungeon Crawler Carl. I gave this one, I forgot the star for for When in Truth. That's a 5-star for me. This one I gave, I'm between a 4.25 and a 4.5. All right, next up we have a fantasy. This is one I had not heard of, but it's Forged by Blood. It's book 1 of the Tainted Blood duology. I don't want to butcher the author's name, but I'll put it right there. It is just so, it's very brutal. If you like really high stakes fantasy, action-packed, some of the best fighting sequences, the thrill of it, I was enraptured by this. Because I was so happy, I sprayed these edges actually, which was really fun. It's not as clean as you would get with an original, getting it at the store, but it's really fun to spray the edges. But I think these edges kind of portray, I try to make it bloody, but that's how it feels. Some things I really enjoyed about this book is the magic. First off, it's unlike Brandon Sanderson is very scientific in the way he builds his magic. This one is less that. It's more of a soft magic, so it just kind of appears and you go with it. And I can really go with this. I really loved how the main character's name, I know it's Demi. She like tells stories about how she uses magic, like with the wind and bringing things. She can like summon things, which is really cool. And I really enjoy that, especially with the fighting sequences. I love that, like, you're able to call things to you. I've always been interested in that type of magic. And I really loved the betrayal in this book, and like, is it betrayal or is it not? Especially with the main character. So our main character and her mom, so Demi and her mom are both Aluso. There's a fear with the ages that these people are going to use their magic to destroy and be destructive and kill. So in our first scene, Demi is watching her mom help this boy from the ages heal because he's been badly injured and he's about to go. And the boy's mom, our caretaker, is also there and being very suspicious of the mom using her magic, even though she's helping this boy. And then as soon as the mom says, he's healthy, but he's gonna need to stay, the caretaker's like, no, we gotta go. But then the mom does a blood sacrifice, cuts her palm. So there are some trigger warnings. I really suggest looking at trigger warnings for this book. The caretaker allows the mom to let him heal and rest. But soon after that, there are people that come and the mother is killed, and that kind of sets off the story, where we also get some betrayal from this boy who says there's a great conversation with Demi and Jonas about his interest in magic, and how he's not like the others, but then he kind of gives her away, and then Demi, and so Demi has to run, and then it becomes a story of revenge for her mother. But it goes deeper into that as you get into the plot. I loved this. I remember just being so excited for it. There are parts where I think it gets a little slower towards the middle. I have this a lot with fantasy books, but I know it's necessary. It's a lot of the time necessary, where it feels like we're just traveling and we're learning more about the world, but it lacked. There was a lot more conversation happening and less action, and I think where this book really thrives is in the action. So those were parts where it got a little more dull for me, but it was still, I would rate this 4.25. All right, now we're getting into the books I am most excited for. The Hunger Game books. Our first one, we have Catching Fire, and then we'll get into the others in just a second. So I had a plan to read this book, and then I was gonna go read either the second Dungeon Crawler Carl book, and then the second Tainted Blood Duology, The Forged by Blood. And I was gonna kind of go in a cycle, read this, that, go back and forth. And then I read Catching Fire, and I was like, I need to read the rest of the series immediately. I just forgot how so good The Hunger Games is. I think I read this in one day. And this is 390 pages, I flew through it. The writing is so singular in our world. And it's not flowery, it gets right to the point. Suzanne Collins does not leave any extra, there's nothing extra there. Everything that needs to be there is there. And my God, Catching Fire, after I read it, I was like, it's a top 5 book of all time for me on reread. I think it's even better reading it as an adult. And with what our country, what our world is going through at the moment, these books are more relevant than ever. As far as the book goes, so if you're not familiar with The Hunger Games, so The Hunger Games, you should read the first book. It's called The Hunger Games first. There's the capital. So the capital there's 12 districts where they forced the districts into this thing called the Hunger Games, and there's 24 tributes, so 2 tributes from each district, so there's 24 of them, and basically in these games they are to fight each other to the death, and there's only one winner. In the Hunger Games, Katniss, her sister, is chosen. So Katniss volunteers tribute, and then she volunteers, and there goes this series and her life, because it's just brutal. And yeah, in case there's anybody that hasn't read it, I don't want to give anything more away, but just the ramifications of everything that happens in that first book. And there's also a love triangle. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't finish Mockingjay, so I didn't know much about one of the characters. I didn't know how one of the character stories ended, and then it just made me realize why there's so much hate for that person. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I can't talk about these books without spoiling so much. If you would like to see a video of more in-depth thoughts on the Hunger Games, I'd love to share it. But that's for Catching Fire and Mockingjay. I will say, also, I think this is my favorite of the cover. I think it's just such an interesting color, and like, especially here. It almost reminds me of like an eclipse. And I think it really fits best as far as these deluxe covers go. I like Catching Fire more, and I don't I do understand. I don't, though. They're more slander for Mockingjay as far as the series goes. A lot of people still love this and think and I agree that it's one of, if not the best YA books, series out there. But this one, I think, because something's missing from these books, and it's more, it gets a lot more political. It's always political, but in this one, it dives deeper into, propaganda is a big part of it. And yeah, there's so much betrayal in these books, and I read a review that was against it, and this is one of those books I will take no criticism for. Even if your criticism is valid, I don't agree. That's just how I feel with these. But Mockingjay and Catching Fire. Now, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So this is a prequel to the Hunger Games, where you get President Snow, Coriolanus Snow perspective. And I didn't read this when it came out in 2020 because I hadn't finished Mockingjay, and I felt obligated to finish that first. And I'm glad I reread the series to really get the whole context, because there's so many little things that you catch, especially people, because it takes place around 64 to 66 years before the original trilogy. And it's really interesting to read from the perspective of what I think is one of the most villainous characters I've ever read. And it's so interesting, the writing style of it. It's a lot more meandering in this. Not to say that there's extra things that don't need to be in here. There's maybe a few things. It's not quite as perfect as the original trilogy, in my opinion. But it adds to his very calculating ways. And it's really hard. It's a hard one to read. It's a villain origin story, and I haven't read many. It makes me want to read more, honestly. Because when I read it, it's like your inclination is to root for the main character, right? And I knew not to. It's like, you don't want to do that. I think I wasn't rooting for him. I was rooting for the other characters around him, but the thing is, he has to make the right decision for them to get the ending that they should get, and not should get, that I want them to get. But I will say, man, it ends so satisfyingly, especially in how it connects with the original, it connects back, and it's just, I'm so excited for Sunrise on the Reaping to see if there's any characters that make appearances in that book. oh my god, I really enjoyed this. I read this pretty fast, and I think it's important to read, and Suzanne Collins always, she says she only writes things when it's necessary for the world to see it, and this came out in 2020, and I think it's even more applicable now. Alright, let's take a tone shift now for our final book, kind of. My final book here is Fredrik Backman's My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry, which is my favorite title of a book I've read, and one of my favorite books of all time, immediately upon finishing it. I was like, it's 6 stars. It's more than that. I very well could have had 2 top 5 books of all time in this month with Catching Fire and this, which is insane. Definitely top 10. So this one, if you're not familiar with Fredrik Backman, I don't recommend starting with this one. I read it I think, well, not perfectly in sync. I would start with A Man Called Uwe. I started with Anxious People, which is very different from, let me actually get those books. Alright, now let's get into some Fredrik Backman lore. I'm not going to take too long on this. This is the one I just read. This is A Man Called Uwe, and he's a curmudgeon, and he is dealing with, I actually don't want to tell you what it's about. I think go into it blind. Just know that the main character is not likable, and you're going to get that with a lot of his books. But I think starting with this one is a great way to see his style of writing with this original, like, set of stories that he has that all follow a very similar tone. So A Man Called Uwe, curmudgeon, great book. There's a movie with Tom Hanks called A Man Called Otto. I believe there's also a Swedish film, because these are translated from Swedish. I saw A Man Called Otto first, and I think I liked the movie more, which is probably really not other people's thoughts, but I thought Tom Hanks did great in that. And sometimes movies can bring out an emotion that's just, it can be different from a book. Even though I love reading more, that one, the music, everything about it was, it hit. Alright, and then this was my favorite of his. Britt Marie Was Here. I've never seen anyone ever talk about this book on BookTube, and I've watched a lot of BookTube videos. No one ever gets to this. They all read the other ones, like A Man Called Uwe, but Britt Marie Was Here, another similar character to Uwe, but Britt Marie, I absolutely love her. One of my favorite characters of all time, and in the book I just read, she's a big part of it, and oh my god, that you read this first, then go into this, read it, and your heart will break, but you'll be mended, it'll be fine. Great book. And then I haven't read Beartown. This is one I plan on reading this year, very soon, hopefully. I know it's a different, I read the first 50 pages at some point, and I wasn't ready for it. It's a different tone from these. These are funnier, I would say, than this. I didn't find much humor in it, but I know I'll love it once I get into it. This is probably his most, I don't know. There's all different, but a lot of people talk about this one in this series. It's a trilogy. This is And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, a little novella. My least favorite of them, just because, but it's still really, it's really impactful. It centers around Alzheimer's, so it'll break your heart, but it's very tiny. But I recommend it if you like his other works. And then the first one I ever read was Anxious People with Book of the Month. I think it was maybe the first book I ever got with Book of the Month, and they won. And as you can see, I have, sorry, there's notes in here, because I recommended it and I wanted people to write their thoughts, because I just thought it's such an important story. And little tabs of these aren't mine, these are other people's that I let borrow, and it's really good. Alright, so that, Fredrik Backman backstory. Alright, now let's get back to the one I most recently read. My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. So we get the perspective of this girl. She's 7 years going on 8. Her name's Elsa. And her best friend is her grandmother. And her grandmother is kind of crazy. On the back it says, Elsa is 7 years old and different. Her grandmother is 77 years old and crazy, as in standing on the balcony, firing paintball guns at strangers crazy. And one of the, I don't want to give too much away of the book, but one of the first scenes is she's like breaking into a zoo at 1 a.m. with her granddaughter, and it's wild, but it's so funny. And then you've watched Gilmore Girls, which I'm currently watching. It kind of reminds me of Rory and Lorelai, where the granddaughter is Rory and then Lorelai is the grandmother. And then you have the mom who of Elsa, who's very much like the grandmother in Gilmore Girls, if that makes any sense. And the humor is kind of similar too. So if you like Gilmore Girls, I recommend Fredrik, Backman, I guess. But then, so it deals a lot with fairy tales, and Elsa is sent on a mission to say sorry to all these people the grandmother wronged in her life. So she goes off, there's a dog. And if you like fairy tales, this book's perfect for you. I love fairy tales, and this book made me remember that life doesn't have to be so serious. It's, that you can explore and live in your own worlds, and that's okay. It's beautiful. And God, it just ties up so nicely, because you get all the characters and they're so funny, but then it's kind of what I was talking about with Brandon Sanderson earlier. Like, you know, with Fredrik Backman, even if he doesn't tell you immediately who this person is, you're gonna get it later, and it's gonna hurt you. But in the best way. Like, it hurts you, but it's very real. And you'll be laughing at the top of a page and then sobbing at the bottom of a page. If that's the type of book you want, this is great. Yeah, I love this book. I think I want more people to read it. I love how people read Beartown and A Man Called Uwe, but I want them to read this, and Britt Marie was here so badly. I want to talk about this with more people. Right, so if you're still here and you listen to all my thoughts on these books, thank you. It really means a lot. If you could hit like and subscribe, that would be wonderful. If not, and I really enjoyed this, and I'm really hoping to do more. Please let me know if there's anything from this video that sparked your attention that you'd like me to talk about more. I love talking about books. I work in a bookstore, so it's what I do for a living. I try to read, on my Goodreads, I try to read 50 books a year. Usually I do like 60. I'm hoping that I'd get more and more. This month it feels a little less because I was sick for a week, so I didn't get to read as much as I wanted to, but I read some great stuff. This is perhaps the best, like, as far as quality goes, reading month I ever had. But please let me know your thoughts if you've read these books, especially the Fredrik Backman, but Hunger Games, like all of them, really. This is Big Top Books, and have a great day. Bye.